Taking one more deep breath in, or for those of you just joining us, our first breath. Coming into this beautiful moment, we breathe in, we let go. Once again, honoring that whatever happened during the day or during the week no longer exists. What's going to happen after this moment also does not exist. Being right here, right now. So I wanted to start by just reading a little excerpt from this book called Only Don't Know by Zen Master Seung Sahn. And it's really cool. I really like this book because it's just a collection of just people all over the world writing in letters, and then he responds to them. And so it's in that format. It's quite interesting. And so this title is A House on Fire, a note from Berkeley, California, July 22nd, 1977. And so this woman said, "It is Friday afternoon and I have just seen 3 clients in a row in psychotherapy who feel totally stuck. All 3 have created their lives so they can see no way out of their situations. So much suffering. Since I have been studying Buddhism, I understand better the causes of the suffering, aka desire, anger, ignorance, but helping other people to understand and to decide to do something about it is another matter. Hitting pillows and getting out the feelings are not enough." That last sentence really shows the era. Anyway, and that was from Diana. "Dear Diana, thank you for your letter. You said that some clients visited you and that they were suffering very much. Buddha said that the world is like a house on fire. He said that it is an ocean of suffering. Let us look deeper at those words. Many people get some things and then they don't get other things, but getting and not getting are the same. If they don't get something, they suffer. If they do get something, it will eventually disappear and then they will suffer. For example, suppose you had a dream last night and you were very attached to that dream, carrying it with you all through the day. When you were dreaming, you did not think that the dream was good or bad. You were just dreaming. But later, if you liked the dream, you want to carry it with you. And if you don't like the dream, you want to forget about it. But a dream is a dream. If you want to hold on to it or push it away, you have a problem. This is the appearance of likes and dislikes. Many people don't understand that likes and dislikes are also a dream. A sleeping dream and everyday thinking are both dreams. They do not exist. If you understand this non-existence, then you will understand that keeping is not necessary and pushing away is also not necessary. Put it all down." Damn it, I added the damn it. Here is another example of suffering, and some of you may have heard this one actually. Suppose there is a small jar full of candy. If you put your hand into the jar and grab a handful of candy, you cannot get your hand out. There will be much suffering. I can't get my hand out. But if you put down the mind that wants the candy, then you can get your hand out and there is no suffering. You can't get your hand out. Why? Who made this suffering happen? If you put down your desire and your thinking, then your hand will slip out easily. There's no problem at all. You said hitting pillows and getting out the feelings are not enough. You are right. These actions only change feelings. They do not help a person to understand karma or cause and effect. Deep breath. So a few things we're going to look at is getting and not getting are the same. If you put down your mind, you will have peace, and most actions only change feelings but don't help us actually resolve karma or help us to understand cause and effect. The first thing I want to really talk about is getting and not getting are the same. Really think about that for a moment. Really hear that. You may have heard me say this before, but let's just absorb it again. Getting and not getting are the same. They keep us on the merry-go-round of suffering. And a perfect example of this is, of course, after we moved here and we got this building and we were just so excited, to move to a new town and start a new business. But then it ended up taking 6 months of reconstruction, and getting this property and moving here turned into 6 months of extreme suffering. And it was just few days ago that I looked back and there was a giant hole in the ground right here where the plumbing went in, and my air mattress was just a foot away from it. So for a couple months, I was just sleeping next to a hole in the ground, and don't roll in it at night. We had to board it up and all that fun stuff. And every single morning, I'd wake up and the air mattress was flat. And so it was just a fun, ongoing, just adventure for us. And what's interesting is that for those of you who've heard me talk about this before, is I just consciously made a choice not to get too excited and putting all my eggs in one basket moving here. Because, when you're moving to a new town, you get a new building, you just got married, it's an adventure. But what's interesting is that had I anticipated that this would be my joy, I would have suffered so much more and it would have turned into resentment because the expectations were not met. Who's ever had an expectation that wasn't met and you got bitter? Right? It's a very common dilemma that many of us face. But what's interesting is that the follow-up is getting and not getting are the same. They both lead to suffering. So those of you may have seen, we have a new building out front there. Anyone notice that giant little thing? If you did not, when you just came in, just turn the corner, you're gonna see this 14 by 20 building. So it was a 6-month adventure. I first contacted the people in February. It was for sale in New Mexico. And then we ended up buying it in May. And then we didn't get it transported till this last Wednesday night. And so it's interesting is that the very beginning of it, I was so excited because I want to buy it. It was affordable. I want to turn it into an Airbnb and all these things. I have all these ideas for it. And then one thing after another started happening and it wasn't working out. And then the movers couldn't move it for a few months. And I had so much anger momentarily, because I'm just like, I just bought it and now it's just sitting on this property, who knows what's going to happen to it. So there's this fear that creeps in because once you buy something, you want to get it moved immediately because it's out of your hands now. I'm like, I would have waited to spend all that money on it had I known that the movers couldn't move it 3 months, because literally 2 hours after I paid the guy, the mover said, oh, something happened, we can't move it now, after we had it all lined up. So again, storyline start to form. But then I let it go. I put my mind down. No more suffering there. And so sure enough, week after week after week, excuse after excuse after excuse, finally it's here. Now that it's here, I look at it and I say, fuck. Back into the pot. Because there's going to be a lot of work ahead of us. There's a lot of work ahead of us to remodel it, go through the hoops, go through the permitting process that we had to do with this. I mean, at least we're not going to have to sleep in it and be in an air mattress or anything. At least we are comfortable now. But it's just like, that was my highest excitement for a short hot minute. And now all of a sudden I look at it, I'm like, But at the same time, it's an investment opportunity. It will allow people to come visit us and stay in an Airbnb, and then they can have a whole Zen treat experience. And so it's one of those things where it's like, a little bit of suffering now to go through it, a lot of hoops to jump through, but then it will eventually help a lot more people. And any of the business decisions I make it's not always about the money. It's actually about, normally it costs a lot more upfront, but it's normally about how will this serve our community in the future? How will it serve other people coming to visit us? And that's where we kind of get ourselves into trouble sometimes. And that's the irony of getting what you want doesn't necessarily lead to happiness. And then often getting what you don't want sometimes actually can be a source of happiness. But it's just always about reconditioning these expectations that we have. And another example, just for example, I've said before, but who's ever been married before and who had a very stressful wedding? That's a very common motif here in America, where it's like planning for the wedding. It's supposed to be this really happy moment, but then it just turns into a shitstorm of stress because you want things to look a certain way. You want things to be perfect. Maybe you haven't been married before, but maybe you got into a relationship and you had an expectation what that relationship would be, and then it's completely something different, and then you suffer. Welcome to the human experience. And so it's just starting to renegotiate within your own mental processing of getting what I want or not getting. They both can lead to forms of suffering. And then the next follow-up to that statement is suffering is not bad. It's not wrong. Pain is not bad. It's not wrong. It just is what it is. You look at it and you can actually learn from it. And so most actions only change feelings, but don't help resolve karma or help us to understand cause and effect. So most actions only change feelings, but don't resolve karma. So when Andrew and I would eat just a giant pizza every night to like help calm our emotions, that wasn't resolving the karma at hand. But what was resolving the karma at hand is we stopped reacting. We didn't react. We didn't freak the F out. We were able to go through the motions of that. Not a single fight ever occurred. And anytime we had to interact with people, we always did so respectfully, mindfully, calmly, And anyone who's ever been in a construction environment, whether in your home or setting up a business, you know that the tension builds, and oftentimes we spill our frustration onto those around us or onto the people that we feel were causing the setbacks. And so the aggression comes out and spills onto them. And so I kind of came up with today an alternative to PPR in my book. There's a practice called pause, process, and respond in my book, which is quite delicious. And you can read that in Living Peace if you want. But I came up with a little bit of a different version of it, specifically for today's teaching, called stop, redirect, and allow. So go ahead and write that down if you are taking notes and you want to. Stop, redirect, and allow. And so when you notice that the crazy is starting to creep out of your little box, that's the moment where we stop. You notice the impulsiveness is increasing. You're starting to feel that lava form. Whatever it is, it could be grief, it could be anger, it could be any of those fun emotions that we get wrapped up into. So we just stop. And another form of stopping, or another way of saying stopping, is choosing. In this moment, I'm going to choose what's going to happen next. And that's where the follow-up is redirecting. And how I like to see it as anytime we notice that our emotions were building in those situations, we learn to redirect the energy. We learn to redirect the ki or the chi life force energy that was creating our reality around us. And that can also be known as planting seeds. And then finally, you have allow, which can also be watching what happens next. And this is letting go, because who's ever planted, I don't know if any of you have done this before, but we do this metaphorically speaking, where we plant seeds of manifestation and then we go and dig them up because they're not growing fast enough, right? We're just like, okay, I put these things in the place, and then we get frustrated when we don't see the little sprouts happening. And that was me with getting this damn building that took 6 months to be delivered, rather than the whole shebang where it could have just been a really easy thing. But that was my ego, wanting it to be so easy and to flow. But what's interesting is that because we just got it this last week, had we got it at the beginning of summer, we would have already fixed it up, put a fence around it and all these things. But now, a couple months later, there's new plans at work. And so we may have other plans for it now. And had we got it sooner, then it would have actually not worked out in our favor today. So that's the part of being watchful. When things are not going as planned, you're still going to take the steps necessary to follow through and do your due diligence. But at the same time, you're going to take a step back and watch and watch and watch and allow and allow and allow. Because again, we don't know everything. We like to think that we do sometimes, but when we allow and just become an observer, a lot more information presents itself, and we're able to kind of gain some important nuggets from it.
Another word that I often have heard that really resonates with that is rest naturally, right? Rest as things are, right? Just allow.
Yes. I love that. Rest naturally. Rest naturally. That is a perfect word for that as well. Thank you. And so stop, redirect, allow, watch, rest naturally. Coming into that ability to just kind of be at peace with things in the moment. Who's good at that? To be at peace with things in the moment. And if you're not good at that, right? If we're not good at that, it's because our ego's running the show. We're getting caught up in what we want things to look like and the expectations and the relationships. Oh my goodness, we suffer so much from it. And that's the beautiful thing where I love about this work is that a huge part of living peace and Dunisha and the studies that we do here is learning, here's a key word that you'll always hear me say, is accepting the reality as it is, accepting the people as they are. A lot of times when I do relationship coaching and couples therapy and all that fun stuff, one of the biggest issues is that each of the partners has a different idea of who they think their partner should be, rather than fully accepting the partner as they are. And so when we always have these expectations of maybe what a wife looks like, a husband looks like, or a sibling looks like, a child looks like, we're projecting our mind on who we want them to be for us, rather than stopping, redirecting the energy and listening and observing and really seeing who they are. And what's fascinating is that often every year we might change into someone different. And we forget that we're constantly evolving. But then, I mean, this happened to me. I never understood as a kid growing up where adults would ask me something that happened 2 years ago. I'm like, that is done. I'm not interested in that shit anymore. I'm grown up now. Have you ever done that where you ask a child and then you haven't seen them in a couple of years or even just a year, and then they're like, are you still interested in these Beanie Babies that I got you? And then you bring them a Beanie Baby and they're just like, and I'm saying this because I collected Beanie Babies, and to be honest, I still have them somewhere. So there's no attachment there. But it's so funny that with my niece and nephew, that they said they're interested in something, and then a couple years later, I went back and I started a conversation, and they were just like, what the hell are you talking about? Because again, in my mind, not much time has passed because I hasn't seen them a lot. But in their mind, a whole 2 freaking years pass and they're a completely new person. And so with children, it's constantly happening. They're constantly growing and changing interests. But as adults, things often slow down and we don't change as quickly as they do. Our interests don't change as quickly as they do. But for most of us, the reason why we may not be changing or growing is, well, when we're adults, we have a lot more insecurity. It builds up over time. And who's ever felt stagnant in things before? And you just put up with shit just to put up with shit because it's almost like more effort and more pain to actually go about changing it. It's very fascinating. It's very fascinating. So again, kind of like how I was looking at my niece and nephew, where I was forgetting that very thing that I went through when I was their age, and I did not prefer it when people didn't think that I actually grew and changed and now have new interests. We do that to each other as adults. And I'm sure some of you who's ever gotten into this work and then your friends thought you were crazy, right? Has that ever happened to you where you kind of got into some spiritual stuff, or you started doing yoga and you started meditating, you started telling your girlfriends or your guy friends about it, and they're just like, what the hell is that? You know, it's brand new to them. And this was especially true 10 years ago when we started seeing the inception of this here into America. And before it was mainstream, now yoga is everywhere. When I first started my first business in Arizona, no one talked about it yet. And so it was this really foreign thing. And so it's interesting is that you may have had these interests and these thoughts and these ideas your whole life, but you've always just suppressed them. And then you start sharing them with the people in your life. And then they just look at you like you're crazy. And you're just like, actually, I've been this person the whole time, but I've never fully expressed myself to you because of Exhibit A, right? And so again, that is part of this whole stopping and redirecting and allowing, is that a lot of times we're not even allowing these seeds to manifest for ourselves. We're just doing the same pattern every single day of our lives. And that goes into, again, most actions only change feelings, but don't help us resolve karma. So let me go ahead and read this real quick. Often to change a situation or a negative feeling, people leave it. Who's ever done that before? We just get out of Dodge. However, this is only a temporary fix. This is how the teaching of wherever you go, there you are comes into effect. Karma, or cause and effect, follows you. Eventually, you will behave in such a way that creates a similar situation of conflict and suffering for yourself. Much of this pain comes from perspective and the way you are open or closed to the world. Realization of our patterns helps us choose different courses of action. And sometimes non-action is the greatest wisdom. Putting down the mind, action without action. So deep breath. Let's breathe that in for a moment. So go ahead and write this question down real quick. How can I respond differently? And I know this is such a like, there it is type of sentence, but it's true. How can I respond differently? If you notice that you have patterns in your life, you may also notice, this is where meditation comes handy. Meditation is great for self-awareness. If you notice that you have patterns in your life and you're slowing down a little bit more and you're able to take note of what's going on, you can really ask yourself, how can I respond differently to this? Or rather, how have I been responding to this? And if I've been responding in a similar way, then we can understand why it keeps happening. But here's a little fun little tidbit. Sometimes people come into a session and then they'll say, Alaric, I did what you said. You know, I really leaned into the pain, and then I had a hard conversation with someone in my life, but then I asked them, what was your tone of voice? Well, their tone was what it always was. And so, yes, they may have been pulling up the rug and pulling out the stuff to confront it finally, but they were still aggressive about it. They were still defensive about it. And so that's the fascinating part of this work, is that it's not just about pulling everything out, ripping off the Band-Aid. You also have to understand that there's a unique approach that comes to it, dropping into our loving kindness, dropping into our compassion, dropping into our ability to unconditionally listen. Write that damn word down, those two words. Unconditionally listen. Woo! That's a hard one, isn't it? Because as people are talking to you, especially through the source of your trigger, it just keeps adding up. Condition, 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 rather than unconditionally listening and then waiting until they have fully let all of their heart spill out. And then it becomes our opportunity to share, to hold space, to speak without the tone. That right there, if you never see me again, I would say take that with you and really work on your first practice, is learning how to not have a tone in your voice. Because that is one of the number one things that shuts down conversation, because it leads to an offense or defense situation. When you enter into it with a tone, instantly the other person becomes defensive, and then you're on an uphill climb from there, versus having a softness in your voice. But then people are then I've heard this excuse too, well, if I have a softness in my voice, they don't listen to me. Well, if they're not listening to you, then shut up for a little bit and just listen to them for a while. Eventually they're going to run out of things to say. Interesting, isn't it? But we normally don't try that, because instantly when our triggers pulled, then we have something to say. So again, I know I've shared this, some of you have heard me say this a lot, but there's a lot of you new here today. So I hope some of these new insights or reminder insights can be a benefit for you in your life. So let's take a breath. If you put down your mind, you will have peace. If you put down your mind, you will have peace. And then I did some little journaling questions for you in this little handout today. And so one of the questions underneath that is, what does it mean to put down your mind? And so it might be different for all of you. And so I invite you to really reflect on this week. What does it mean to put down your mind? But generally speaking, what I love about this is, if you put down your mind, you will have peace. And what that teaches us is that our natural state is actually quite peaceful. Our natural state is without assumption, is without expectation, is without all of the likes and the dislikes and the resistances and all that fun stuff that goes with it. And so when you put down the mind, what's interesting is you actually return to a state of rest. You return to a state of neutral, objective observation. You return to a state of wellness. Because it's when we pick up the mind that instantly we have the polarity, the duality, like, dislike, resistance, acceptance, pushing, pulling, holding tight, the three aspects of ego I also teach. And then you put it down, you're like, oh. Then you pick it back up, oh. Put it down, oh. And it becomes this really crazy experience. But again, some of you, hopefully all of you have experienced even just 1 second putting down the mind. And if you haven't before, that's okay. We can work on that together and we can get there. But it is interesting that most of what we're taught here in America, I can't attest to anywhere else in the world, but here in America, it's almost like everything that we're being pitched and sold are things to add to our mind, right? But not a lot is actually teaching us to put down the mind, to relinquish things, let go of notions. There's even the self-help industry is all about, a lot of it is about identity and empowering yourself. And a lot of that is adding more to it rather than releasing. And so of course, there's that quote that says, knowledge is gaining a little bit every day while wisdom is letting go. And so very fascinating stuff. Let's breathe that in for a moment. One more breath. So I'm making a conscious choice to make these sermons a little bit shorter. So I'm just contemplating right now how I want to wrap it up. So let's take another breath. So a quote that I've been sharing a bit here and there that I came up with maybe a month or two ago is that kindness is easy. Most of us do it daily. Really think about that. Kindness is easy. Most of us do it daily. But when it really matters, that's when we're not often kind. And when our karma, our core wounds are being triggered, that's when we're not being kind. And so my invitation, my homework for all of you this week is that the next time that you get triggered, which will likely happen sometime this week, be it large or small, stop, redirect, and allow, and followed up with that ability to be kind. Because you know it well, every single one of you, I'm sure there's moments where you've been kind in life. You may have even shown some kindness today. Maybe some of you have animals and you're really good at being kind to animals. When it comes to humans, it's another thing. I hear that a lot. But another sentence I really like, or another phrase I like, is I'm really good at containing my energy. Does that make sense? I'm really good at containing my energy. And what that means is I'm good at not spilling my shit everywhere. Now, this wasn't always the case. This wasn't always the case. But when you notice that you're getting to that point, that overheated, that overwhelmed point, really think of that word, containment. And it almost sounds like counterproductive. But last week on a Sunday, I think it was, we kind of talked about just because you feel the need to express, it doesn't mean it's actually going to be healthy. And so a lot of times when we feel like we're getting overwhelmed, we end up spilling that energy onto those around us because it helps us. But then it just creates another wound that we have to go heal later. And so when you get really good at containing your energy, containing your crazy, containing the grief, containing whatever it is, and then following up with a healthy release somewhere else, such as in therapy. I cannot tell you how many people are just like, man, I need therapy. I'm like, well, are you in it? No. Well, it's interesting. A lot of people are not in our country really don't fully go into it. So they don't necessarily have a sacred space, a healthy place to release it. So then they just call their friends or they call their family members, and maybe they contained it in the moment, but then they spilled it onto someone else, AKA venting, AKA griping, AKA bitching, AKA whatever word you want to use. I don't prefer bitching, but there it is. Some people use it. I relate to you. Does that make sense? We hold it here, we spill it there. Now, rather, we're learning to hold it here and then release it in a very safe environment. And in that safe environment, there's a follow-up on what to do next by a professional. Now, that's some juicy shit, isn't it? That's not a great combination either. Anyway, moving on to the next moment. Let's take a breath. So stop. Redirect, allow, stop, redirect, allow, or for those of you who like PPR, pause, process, and respond, pause, process, and respond. Deep breath in, letting go. Thank you, thank you, thank you. For those of you who joined us, thank you for watching the fullness of this video. Links are below if you want to join the student program. It is quite wonderful indeed, or even just to hear in their life coaching session helps redirect the energy. As always, we appreciate any donations that you're able to provide. Thank you and see you next week.